This is the SS Yongala, a passenger and cargo ship that began its journey in 1903. For most of its short life, it travelled across the Australian continent, carrying people and goods through vast waters. But almost as if fate had been written in advance, the Yongala's story came to a tragic end in 1911, just 8 years after it set sail. While passing through the Great Barrier Reef in northeastern Australia, the world's largest coral reef system, the ship was caught in a violent storm. It sank without warning, taking all 122 passengers and crew down with it. No one survived. After the tragedy, Australian media started calling the SS Yongala the Titanic of the tropics. And strangely, for nearly 50 years after the sinking, no one could find where the ship had gone down. It wasn't until 1958 that a group of divers accidentally discovered the wreck. From then on, the site became one of the most popular dive locations in Australia, attracting over 10,000 divers and tourists every year. Townsville, Australia, October 22nd, 2003, 9 a.m. Like many other visitors, 26-year-old Tina Watson and her husband Gabe Watson, 32, boarded a boat to dive and explore the SS Yongala resting beneath the sea. After a short boat ride, the couple arrived at the dive site. They switched to a larger dive vessel and received a quick briefing from the dive leader. Since Tina and Gabe had brought most of their own gear, the dive company only needed to supply air tanks. Once fully suited up, Tina, Gabe, and 4 other divers entered the water and began their descent into the deep. Only a few minutes in, Gabe suddenly surfaced alone and returned to the boat. He told the crew that his dive computer, the device that tracks depth, dive time, and other safety data, had stopped working. A crew member removed the device from Gabe's wrist and replaced the battery. Thankfully, the computer started working again right away. With the issue fixed, Gabe and Tina went back into the water. But shockingly, just 2 minutes later, Gabe surfaced again, this time in a panic, shouting that Tina was in trouble. The dive leader immediately jumped in. He quickly spotted Tina sinking fast, deeper and deeper into the ocean. It was a terrifying moment, but with years of experience behind him, the dive leader stayed calm and gave everything he had to reach her. Tina was already 30 meters, about 100 feet below the surface, and sinking rapidly. Within 30 seconds, the dive leader reached her, but she was already unconscious. He quickly brought her back up to the boat. As soon as they surfaced, the crew rushed to help. They began performing CPR right away. Gabe, still shaking, stood nearby watching his wife, looking terrified and overwhelmed. The rescue team fought for 41 minutes to save Tina's life, but heartbreakingly, at 11:21 a.m., Tina Watson was pronounced dead. At first, everything was believed to be a tragic diving accident, but just a few dozen minutes later, the dive leader noticed something unusual. Tina's dive computer showed a total dive time of only 7 minutes. That meant Tina had lost her life after just 7 short minutes underwater. Gabe Watson, her husband, was seen crying when asked what had happened. He told everyone it was a sudden accident. According to Gabe, while they were diving, the current was stronger than expected. Tina started to panic and signalled that she wanted to go back up. He said he immediately swam over to help her ascend. But in her panic, Tina accidentally struck Gabe's mask, causing his oxygen to leak out. His vision was briefly blocked by bubbles, and by the time they cleared, Tina was already sinking fast. Gabe claimed he had no choice but to return to the surface for help. The dive leader then asked Gabe a critical question. Why didn't you dive back down to try and save her yourself? Gabe gave a strange answer. He said he had an issue with his arm and couldn't dive deeper. He also claimed he was never trained in rescue diving, the technique of bringing an unconscious diver safely back to the surface. But here's the problem. Gabe was actually a certified and experienced diver. He even held a rescue diver certification. The dive leader, who knew about Gabe's diving background, couldn't understand why he made no effort to save his wife, especially when she was in danger right before his eyes. The next day, the autopsy results came in. Tina had died from asphyxiation and showed signs of air embolism, a condition caused by air bubbles entering the bloodstream. However, something didn't add up. The investigators found very little water in her lungs. That's highly unusual for a typical drowning case, where the lungs are often filled with the water. Despite these strange details, the authorities in Australia initially ruled Tina's death as a tragic accident. A few days after the incident, Gabe returned to the United States, bringing Tina's body back with him. A funeral was held, and friends and family gathered to support him in his time of grief. But something felt off. At the funeral, Gabe was seen smiling, even joking about Tina's death. Some said he looked more relaxed than heartbroken. He even made fun of her death in front of her loved ones. And as if that wasn't enough, right after the funeral, Gabe contacted the travel insurance company to claim the life insurance money on Tina's policy, a policy he had taken out just before their honeymoon. The company refused to pay him, stating that her death occurred during a diving activity, which wasn't covered under the policy. Tina's father, Tommy, was furious, both at Gabe's inappropriate behaviour at the funeral and the fact that he had tried to cash in on his daughter's death so soon afterward. He believed there was more to the story and decided to investigate the case himself. Determined to find the truth, Tommy flew to Australia and personally met with people who were on the dive boat the day Tina died. The first person he talked to was the dive leader, the same man who had tried to save Tina. He confirmed that Gabe's behaviour that day was strange and that Gabe didn't seem like someone grieving the loss of a wife. That was all Tommy needed to hear. He immediately filed a request with Australian police to reopen the investigation into his daughter's death. As doubts grew, Australian police decided to reopen the investigation from scratch, and that's when everything began to unravel. The first clue came from other divers who had been on the same boat as Gabe and Tina that day. When interviewed, one of the divers revealed that he had been recording his dive with a video camera, and by chance, he had captured footage of Gabe and Tina underwater during the incident. In the video, the diver said it looked like Gabe was holding onto Tina in a way that prevented her from moving. Then came a second, even more chilling piece of evidence. Another diver, Gary Stempler, had snapped an underwater photo, one that would later become iconic in the case. It showed Gabe swimming upward toward the surface, while Tina was sinking helplessly toward the ocean floor. He had simply left her behind. Combined with the autopsy results, which showed only a small amount of water in Tina's lungs, a new theory emerged. Gabe may have intentionally turned off Tina's oxygen tank while underwater and then held her in place until she lost consciousness. After she went limp, he likely turned her oxygen back on, let her sink, and swam to the surface to call for help, acting like it had all been an accident. Another suspicious detail emerged. Tina had skipped the practice dive earlier that day, which is highly discouraged for dangerous dive sites like the Yongala wreck. Investigators quickly found out why. Gabe didn't let her go, telling dive staff he would personally teach her everything she needed to know. And then came a third, deeply troubling discovery. When diving, people naturally float, so divers wear weights to help them descend and stay underwater. Normally, Tina only needed about 3 kilograms of weight to dive safely. But on that day, she was wearing an unusually heavy weight belt, about 9 kilograms. And guess who had strapped that weight belt onto her? Gabe. When the dive leader asked Gabe about it, he casually replied that he had added extra weight to help Tina dive more easily and denied having any other reason. But the dive leader was growing more and more suspicious. He shared everything he had observed about Gabe before, during and after the incident with the police. By July 2004, police were no longer treating this as a tragic accident. It was now a criminal investigation. Gabe Watson was officially named a suspect, and Australian authorities requested that he return from the US for questioning. But Gabe refused. Instead, he hired a legal team and responded to the court only through written statements. However, even those statements were filled with inconsistencies, especially when compared to the data recorded by his dive computer, which logged every move he made underwater. To Australian investigators, this was clear. Gabe had lied. They believed he had turned off Tina's air supply, held her until she passed out, and left her to die. But the question remained, why would a man murder his wife just 11 days after their wedding? The answer came from Tina's father, Tommy. He revealed that before the honeymoon, Gabe had convinced Tina to increase her life insurance coverage, and name him as the sole beneficiary. This, combined with his suspicious behaviour and the immediate attempt to claim the insurance money after her death, led police to believe they had found the motive: money. In 2005, Australia officially charged Gabe Watson with murder and requested his extradition. But Gabe made it clear he would never return to Australia. That is until May 2009, 6 years after Tina's death, when growing pressure and legal challenges forced Gabe to finally fly back to Australia. And at last, the truth behind what really happened to Tina Watson, the young bride who never came back from her honeymoon, began to emerge for the world to see. Tina Watson was born in West Germany in 1977. At just 3 years old in 1980, she was adopted by Tommy and Cindy Thomas, a loving couple from Alabama, USA. Despite growing up in a completely new country with a different culture and language, Tina adjusted quickly. With the unconditional love of her adoptive parents, she had a happy and fulfilling childhood, just like any other well-loved child. However, Tina's early life wasn't without challenges. From a young age, she was diagnosed with a heart condition called paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia, or PSVT, a disorder that causes episodes of rapid heart rate, dizziness, fatigue, and shortness of breath. Over the years, she underwent several medical procedures to try to manage her condition, but the symptoms never fully went away. Still, Tina remained brave, cheerful, and determined. She learned to care for herself and even looked after the family's beloved dogs with great affection and responsibility. In school, she was hard-working and ambitious. Her dedication paid off when she was accepted into the University of Alabama, one of the most prestigious public universities in the state. With the motto, "Where legends are made," this university has been the foundation for many successful careers, from tech executives at Google to business leaders and innovators. Tina's life felt even more complete when she fell in love. She started a relationship with a fellow college student from another university in the state. Their connection was strong and deep, and before long they were engaged. The ring Tina wore on her finger was a symbol of the sweet, promising future they were building together. But then everything changed. One day, Tina met Gabe Watson, a graduate student at her university. Despite knowing Tina was already engaged, Gabe persistently asked her out. Even when Tina clearly told him she was taken, Gabe refused to give up. At first, Tina stayed true to her fiancé and stood by her decision, but as time passed, her parents' disapproval of her engagement put pressure on the relationship. Eventually, Tina and her fiancé made the heartbreaking decision to call off their wedding. Gabe didn't waste a moment. He stepped in and once again asked Tina out, and this time she said yes. Over time, Gabe slowly won her heart. Tina fell deeply in love and began talking proudly to her father about this new man in her life, a charming classmate from college whom she hoped to marry. At first, her parents were sceptical. Something about Gabe didn't sit right with them, but having already interfered with one of Tina's relationships, they didn't want to hurt her again. So, despite their reservations, they gave their blessing. Tina and Gabe began to plan for the future. Like many young couples in love, they dreamed of a perfect wedding and an unforgettable honeymoon to mark the beginning of their new life together. Tina and Gabe had started planning their honeymoon long before the wedding. Their dream destination, Australia, a place Tina was especially excited about because of her fascination with scuba diving and the world-famous Great Barrier Reef. But when Tina's parents heard about the plan, they were worried. With her known heart condition, diving deep underwater posed serious risks. Gabe, however, reassured them. He claimed to be an experienced diver himself and promised that Tina would be perfectly safe by his side. To calm their fears, he encouraged Tina to take diving lessons and get certified before the trip. By the time they departed, Gabe had logged 55 dives. Tina, on the other hand, had completed only 5. Then something strange happened. Just 18 days before the wedding, Gabe suggested something odd. He told Tina she should increase her life insurance policy and name him as the sole beneficiary. Tina was confused, but she didn't want to cause conflict. She casually mentioned the conversation to her father, who immediately sensed something wasn't right. He advised her to wait and reconsider after the honeymoon. But the wedding went on as planned. On October 11th, 2003, Tina and Gabe were married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by friends and family. In the videos and photographs, Tina beamed with joy. She had no idea that in less than 2 weeks her life would be over. After spending their first week in Sydney, the couple travelled to Queensland to begin the diving portion of their trip. On October 22nd, 2003, just minutes after beginning a dive, Tina died. According to Gabe, she had simply sunk suddenly and was unresponsive, but questions began to emerge almost immediately. Australian police grew suspicious, especially when Gabe refused to return to the country to answer further questions. Meanwhile, his behaviour in the United States became increasingly bizarre. Tina's parents, devastated by her death, were horrified to discover that someone had been vandalising her grave. Flowers and gifts left at her tombstone were being damaged or tossed in the trash. When authorities checked surveillance footage, they were stunned to discover Gabe himself was responsible. He claimed he was simply cleaning up the site to keep it tidy. The court didn't buy it. A restraining order was issued, banning him from going near Tina's grave. Even as the investigation remained open, Gabe seemed to move on quickly. In 2006, just 3 years after Tina's death, he was publicly dating a woman named Kim Lewis, a woman who, disturbingly, looked eerily similar to Tina. In 2008, he announced that they were engaged. Back in Australia, authorities continued building their case. Under pressure, in 2009, Australia requested Gabe's extradition. At first, he refused, but when prosecutors downgraded the charge from murder to manslaughter, he agreed to return. Once in Australia, Gabe pleaded guilty, not to murder, but to failing to fulfil his duty to rescue his wife. The court found that, as an experienced diver, he could have saved her but didn't. He was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison, but after appealing, his sentence was reduced to just 18 months. Tina's family was devastated. The punishment didn't feel like justice, but their lawyers had another strategy. They advised the Watsons to file murder charges in the United States, alleging that Gabe had planned Tina's death before they even left the country. Prosecutors in Alabama agreed and issued a murder indictment. However, extradition laws required the US to promise not to seek the death penalty. Australia insisted on this condition before releasing him. The US government agreed. On November 1st, 2010, Gabe was released from his Australian sentence. Then, on November 25th, 2010, he was formally extradited to the US and arrested upon arrival. At trial, prosecutors alleged Gabe had manipulated Tina into diving, knowing her weak heart put her at greater risk, all to collect on her life insurance. They highlighted how he had urged her to increase the insurance policy, tried to make himself the sole beneficiary, added extra weight to her diving gear, prevented her from completing orientation dives, and failed to act when she began to drown. But the court ruled that these facts, while troubling, were not enough to prove murder. They found that the extra weight wasn't conclusive evidence of intent. Gabe's failure to save his wife had already been punished in Australia. And crucially, the life insurance policy had never been updated to name him as the beneficiary. In the end, Gabe Watson was acquitted of all charges. Today, Gabe is free. He's married to Kim Lewis, who again bears an uncanny resemblance to Tina, and whom he had known since high school. To this day, it remains unclear whether Gabe and Kim reconnected after Tina's death, or if their relationship had already begun while Tina was still alive. What's certain is this: Gabe Watson walks free, and Tina's parents, who loved and raised her from the age of 3, are left grieving, angry, heartbroken, and without justice.